Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Chris Haig with Meerkat Cyber. We're excited to be broadcasting from the Lifeline Data Center Suite at the Indy 500 track, and even more excited about the panel that we have next to us. Starting to my left is Matt Travis, CEO of Cyber AB. Not a whole lot more needs to be said because everybody knows him in the ecosystem. After that, we have Rob Teague. He is the Director of CMMC Services at Redspin. He's a CCA and a member of the IANS faculty. We have Steve Palomora to his left, Vice President of Lifeline Data Centers. And then we have, all the way at the end, Brian Winchester, who's an RP. He's also the owner of Reach Networks. And he has a lot of acronyms that he associates with, including CISP, CISM, CCSP, and CISA. Excited to bring a lot of subjects to this group today. Each one of them has a different perspective. And we are also welcoming questions from the audience, so please feel free to submit those in the chat. I want to start off at the top with Matt. CMMC news. Is there any breaking news that we can benefit from knowing?
Breaking, I'm not sure. Well, first off, Chris, great to be with you, and thanks to Lifeline Data Centers for the invitation back. Always great to be back home again in Indiana. Exciting time here in May with the race. The Patriots are doing well, so and there's a great industrial base here in central Indiana, so it's appropriate that we're here as well. So breaking news, no breaking news, but CMMC, it might be breaking news to some, is up and running. Certification assessments are ongoing. Some people think we're still waiting for CMMC to start. CMMC started right after the new year. The final 32 CFR, that's the Code of Federal Regulations rule, which creates the CMMC program, went live. And C3PAOs are off and doing level 2 certification assessments. So that is news. And I think for those of us been following the program for a long time, it is welcome news that I'd say the voluntary side of CMMC is up and running.
We know that 32 CFR went into effect in December. Do we know anything about 48 CFR? What are the rumors?
Good chance for me to reiterate that the Cyber AB is an independent nonprofit organization that supports the Department of Defense through a no-cost contract. Nothing I say here should be construed as representing the federal government. So I'm outside the rulemaking tent, and in essence as well with the 48 CFR rule, which is a rule that deals with the procurement implementation of CMMC requirements. That rule isn't even under the purview of the CIO, that the 32 program rule is. It's under the Undersecretary for Acquisition. So it's normal when new administrations come in that there's a pause in rulemaking. That certainly happened with the new administration in January, and so I think there's a lot of resettling in terms of the regulatory and deregulatory policies of the administration. But that notwithstanding, everything I'm hearing is that they're just waiting for final clearance in OIRA, Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. I don't think any more changes to that rule, so it's just a matter of getting it through whatever new processes are for the publication of new rules in the Trump administration. Once that hits, we would expect a 60-day 60-day congressional review period. So if it comes out in June, I think you'll see the 48 rule in effect sometime late summer. That's my best guess.
Awesome. Late summer, I hear, as a guess. Other countries are implementing CMMC. We know Canada kind of leapfrogged us, and they've done revision 3 of NIST 171. What other countries do you know of that are rolling things out?
Well, our friends to the Great White North kind of got thrown for a bit of a loop because they've been building their program, the CPCSC, the Canadian program for cybersecurity certification, to mirror CMMC. They were going to use 800.171 Rev 3, as you say, and everything else would be identical to a CMMC. But when the 32 rule came out, the program does not allow for any reciprocity or any other standards acceptance. Alternatively, the rest of the world is welcome to come into the CMMC program itself. And so that's the real change, that there won't be one-off bilateral agreements with other countries. Every country can send their own people to become CCPs and CCAs. There can be C3POs in Italy that use Italian assessors. The requirements are the same. And that C3PO in Italy would be eligible to assess and certify an Italian defense contractor or an American defense contractor. So it really is a global program. And we're seeing a lot of international interest, especially from Asia, from Canada. We have the first Canadian C3PO that applied. We have 3 non-U.S. persons who become CCA, including their Tier 3 determination. So those processes are in place, and I do expect international growth to be a real exciting element of the CMMC initiative.
Awesome. So I'm going to turn this over to the panel. Let's talk about external service providers, ESPs. Big part of the rule is trying to clarify what do ESPs need to do to play in this space. I want to ask specifically the certification process. What are some ways that ESPs can help the DIB? And are there cost or time savings by using an ESP? Maybe start with you, Rob.
Okay. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of smaller organization contracting companies leveraging quite a few ESPs. When you think about what the ESP brings to the table, that's one less person they have to bring on staff, pay at the price for an engineer to develop your data, to get all the network up and running. The ESP can do all that for them, and it really becomes an extension of the team. That's how the C3PAOs look at the ESPs, as an extension of the team when we do the interviews. So often they are the ones providing us evidence. They're the ones talking about the configurations they put in place. So for the small organizations, it's becoming very, very helpful. For the medium and bigger organizations, I always crack up because the small contractors are like, well, we're not a big giant prime, so we don't have a big IT department. Well, they've got their own issues, they're global. So imagine trying to contain that globally. So an ESP can also help the primes in that capacity, because you can set up a cloud environment and just let them run everything as long as they're reporting to you. I think you're going to get into the relationships with the ESPs. That is vital when you're choosing one, but they can do a lot of work for the smaller organizations.
What is possibly the most important document your ESP needs to have if you were going to have one?
Well, we know it in the industry as a shared responsibility matrix, but under CMMC, it's a customer responsibility matrix. The CRM really delineates what they are going to do and what you're going to do as their customer. So we review that as the C3PAOs. Our assessment teams take a look at that. We don't necessarily need to see that called out in the system security plan, but we do want it referenced. So if you get down to a certain area, it'll say, we do this for the firewall, our ESP does this, see the CRM.
Hey, I was going to say, Rob, being a third-party assessor, if an ESP, does an ESP have to be level 2 certified, or does it help if they are level 2 certified validate their SRM versus if they're not?
Steve, that's a great question. By the way, thanks for, like Matt said, thanks for having us back. This is always,
Absolutely.
It's race day, people. I'm excited to see some cars on the track.
Becoming a tradition, and this year we don't have rain, so
No,
I think
we
the cars
don't.
are going to be running.
Even though Matt and I dressed up and prepped for the rain.
Are you trying to avoid the question here, Rob? It is a tough question.
No, so I will tell you, it's becoming better. When the rule first came out, there was a lot of confusion. Do I need a level 2 cert? Do I not? Many of the ESPs that I have spoken with are actually going for the certifications because it gives validity to their program when organizations are looking at it. I absolutely agree. I think if you're going to be an ESP, I would definitely get some folks to the CCP course and that CCA course, because they're going to understand what your clients are going through. And the more they understand that, the better they can serve those customers.
What if a DIB contractor approaches his ESP or her ESP and they don't have a shared responsibility matrix? Are you worried?
Go to the next one.
Yep.
Yeah. Actually, we've heard horror stories that there are some ESPs out there. They've already signed, the clients have already signed and waiting for their assessment dates to get, approach. So they're reaching out to the ESP to start collecting the evidence, and the ESP wants to charge them for the evidence. Customer responsibility matrix is an extra $1,500 when that should have already been in place as part of their operations. So you really got to do your homework when you're looking at the ESPs. Find one that thinks the same as you, has the same morals, ethics, everything, and that you don't mind interacting with on a typical basis. So what I always like to tell folks is, do you want, when you get that midnight call just before on Christmas Eve, do you want it to be a grumpy person, or do you want it to be somebody you don't mind talking to? Because that's typically when the network's going to go down.
So I want to talk about the value of ESPs. I'm going to use an example of Lifeline data centers. We had a client that was bidding on a incredibly important contract, $50 million. And they came back in the bidding process, and the prime wanted to know, are you in a level 3 environment? And of course they were not at that point, but we said, let's see what we can do. Well, you got 48 hours to get there.
And this was not a large company.
This was not a large
Right.
company. I know why you're saying that. We can't make this promise at all times. 48 hours, we got the policies drafted.
Nice.
They got them spun up in Lifeline data centers at a level 3 environment. Again, this is not a promise that we can do this at all times, but this is the value of an ESP. You've got people who know what they're doing, who are in the CMMC space that can help you accomplish things that just aren't possible without their help.
And we have full inheritance, 60%, partial at 30%. And so what we were able to demonstrate is that they could show that they were 60% compliant as soon as we got them spun up, and that everything else was either in progress or evaluated. And that's part of what you did, is
That's right.
look at what they had in place. And
Well, and that's some of the maturity we've seen with the ESPs since the rule, prior to the rule coming out, and since it's come out, with a lot of clarification from the PMO office and the Cyber AB. But the good ESPs are going to be the ones that have already got templates all set up that you can pass off to the clients. Your CRM is fully prepped and ready to go. I hear cars on the track, so I'm getting excited. So again, you got to do your homework. The ESPs, the ones that have the CCAs and CCPs on staff, seem to be a lot more better prepared to assist the DIB contractors than those organizations that don't have anybody on staff. And again, this is generalized. Obviously, there's plenty of great ESPs out there to choose from, but I would venture to say that when you started setting those up, it wouldn't have taken 2 days. It was probably longer, but you guys have, over the time period, have just gotten better at,
that's absolutely correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, that we are getting better. It's a virtual desktop environment, so it's all mostly off the shelf with some proprietary processes that we put in place.
Absolutely.
And Chris, I just add that I think one of the most important questions for a defense company to ask themselves and of their ESP is, what type of ESP are they, right? So ESP is a kind of a general term. It's a customized CMMC term. But if you look at the 32 CFR rule, it requires the OSA or the OSC to first determine, is your ESP a cloud service provider or not a cloud service provider? And then depending on the answer to that question, you're going down to potentially different paths. But the rule doesn't give any great help to the companies to, how do I know if my ESP is a cloud service provider or not? Because as these guys know, services that are being offered by MSPs, depending on how they're manipulating the services, could in fact be cloud services. So the FedRAMP option for cloud services, the CMMC level 2 for what we'd consider MSPs or MSSPs. And I think we'll be working with DoD as well as some of the industry folks to get some better guidance to the defense sector, so they understand the type of ESP that they're contracting with.
Speaking of guidance, you gave some awesome guidance at the CS2 show this last week that I was able to attend and watch. And we had a panel of assessors and some very skilled assessors that had done quite a few assessments discussing a topic related to the 10-day business period after an assessment is over, and what kind of, let's say, data or evidence can be submitted during that time. I had not heard your opinion on that before, and it may have been the very first time you've given that, but I think it's critical to tell the assessment community out there, tell the DIB, what is the interpretation we should have of that 10-day period.
Yeah, Chris, so I think once the 32 CFR rule came out, even though it took a long time to write, I think there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, and in some cases the language used maybe wasn't as clear or precise as the department would have liked it to be, and I think this 10-day reevaluation period is a good example. So for those maybe not as familiar with it, there is a clause in the CMMC rule where if a security requirement is determined to be not met, that the OSC would have 10 days to present additional evidence that could lead to the assessment going from a not met to a met. So what does that additional evidence mean? Now, there's some caveats there, right? So any new additional evidence can't change the configuration of a security requirement that's already been assessed, and you can't do it after all of the assessment findings report has been completed. So there's a window there, essentially, between phase 2 and phase 3 of the assessment, where the company can present additional evidence. Now, it should probably have read in the rule additional existing evidence. What that 10-day period is not a period for corrective actions, remediation. It's additional existing evidence. So, for example, if you had a key personnel who maybe is your FIPS expert, and on the day of the assessment, when the assessors were going through the FIPS requirements, you couldn't get a straight answer out of the other employees, and the assessor would have to say, well, you clearly don't know how this works, so that's a not met. If that FIPS expert, if she's back on the job 2 days later, you could say, no, here's our FIPS expert. Let that person talk to the issue. If there's a document that's missing that they can't find. So it's additional existing evidence that was not presented to the assessor at the time that the not met determination was made. It is not for, hey, my MFA software is all jacked up. Give me 10 days, I'll go buy a new one and reinstall it and come back and look at that. This is all different than the discretion that assessors like Rob will have, that in the course of an assessment, as they're evaluating evidence, if there is something that is, I would say, minor, that whether maybe a signature was outdated or maybe there was something in a documentation that needed to be added or changed, that the assessor in his or her discretion can say, why don't you fix that before I actually mark the score here. That's separate. That's not the 10-day window. The 10-day window is only for additional existing evidence that had not been previously presented to the assessor that could change the determination from a not met to a met. And I think some CPOs understood that way, but others probably haven't.
Yeah, and again, I liken that back to, for those C3PAOs that had the opportunity to do the joint surveillance assessments with DIBCAC, I think they're a trained plus in all of that. That's because that's how DIBCAC operates, correct? So the way I liken it is, if you have an organization that, say, for example, has 2 firewalls, they provided a screenshot to us of one of the firewalls showing the FIPS mode is enabled, but they didn't provide one for the second one. However, we do a live screen share and they showed us both. So what we may do is say, hey, for the second firewall, take a screenshot and load that in. We've seen it live. We've marked it in the reports. This will be the additional evidence, because on its own, it would have failed without both screenshots, right? So when you look at that, it's not meant to make complete adjustments. Oh, I kind of missed that. Yeah, I'll slide that in. Maybe they won't know it. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to make those minor adjustments, because we all know when you get into the documentation, SSP, policies, procedures, you can go document blind, and it's easy to miss the little things. We see it all the time during assessments. So those adjustments, again, discretion of the assessor. But when we ask for evidence, it should be something that's already existing that can bolt on to what you've already provided to give that definite decision to the assessor that they are good.
And I was going to ask you and you may or may not know the answer to this because it's not down your lane, but you certainly use these. Mm-hmm. Are GRC tools, will they assist you in better preparing to that level, right? Do they actually guide you to that level?
No, that's a great question, Steve. So we're seeing a lot of various GRC tools. There's numerous. We actually enjoy using them because everything is in one area and it's contained. And depending on the tool, you'll pull up the actual system security plan. We'll have that up on a screen, and then we'll have the policies and procedures up. And then also the evidence is sitting right on the same window. So you can literally click everything and it's all tied together. So it really helps organize the assessment. And the last thing you want is an assessor digging through your files trying to find stuff, because we're going to uncover all kinds of crazy stuff. So the more you can contain us during that assessment, the better off your assessment will be.
Brian, I want to pull you into this. So let's return to the ESP conversation. Is an MSP an ESP?
It's a third party. So I would say yes, depending on what they're doing, right? as an MSP and as an ESP, it's a pretty broad scope, right? So to describe that out, well, yes, absolutely.
So
Brian is he is the CEO of Reach Networks, and as an example of how that we talked. I was talking to a gentleman out there actually in the drone business with AI, and they talk about co-opetition, and you guys at the C3PAO level cooperate as well, right? You collaborate, cooperate.
Yeah.
We have a channel partner program.
Yes.
And Brian is a key part of that for Lifeline data centers. You provide services that we can't necessarily, we don't necessarily, we can't be experts at everything, right? So we rely on channel partners for certain aspects of what we do. We're a data center, right? So we're very good at servicing compliance as a service and pushing out our compliance posture. Not as much so when it comes to some of the ESP functions,
right,
like setting up and properly setting up GCC high,
yes,
and supporting that piece.
Yes. Well, the GCC high has been something we've been very instrumental with, helping clients move from their 365 tenant into the environment for GCC high. There's some nuances, differences between the two environments. So to be able to move through that transition and migrate, we have some extensive expertise in that, and we've been doing that for quite a while. That piece has been really fun. As I'm sitting here, I love information security programs, so I geek out when I hear about governance, and as difficult as governance is, I love that there's so much focus on it because that filters down through. So I'm really enjoying this. Building information security programs, going into a VDI environment or how you're building your enclave. You're also protecting your entire environment. It's just not that one piece. So that's something that we do as well. We'll come in and work with people on boots on the ground in their environment on-prem, and making sure they're transitioning well into the environment, and working with Lifeline has been a wonderful, wonderful thing. And just during this whole event, the ecosystem that we have built between knowledge is just helpful for not only the DoD, but for the clients as well. And it's really it's promising to see how far we've come. And again, I love the governance, and I know that's a difficult piece to get through, but you have to start there. So I just wanted to make sure I let you know how much I've been enjoying that.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point, Brian. Again, passion. If you see passion in the ESP that you're talking with, we all know this is a business, right? Just like the contractors know it's a business, but the core foundation of it, you got to have a passion for this. You got to understand what the contractors bring to the table for our warfighters, and we don't want to see that end. So when you're partnering with somebody as valuable as an external service provider that is managing your security protection data, you want to make sure they're passionate about it. That's one of the key things I look for.
And I'll add to that, we have some ESPs or service providers that we've worked with that say things like, well, that's our secret sauce. We don't want to really document that. That's a red flag. Transparency. You're looking for transparencies, people that get excited about helping you out, and that's the kind of people we have up here.
Well, the other thing is, the contractors are looking to you for advice when they're talking with you. So many of them are not very familiar with the setups, right? Such as a VDI. If you're going through Microsoft, that's going to cost additional money for a VDI. But the question is, if you pay that money, it takes your laptops out of scope. If you lock the cloud down, you can literally take the whole physical domain out of scope.
Yeah.
So where do you want to be business, Mr. Contractor, right? If you spend this extra money, you can make the assessment a little easier and more control, but more you can mature it and manage it over the long haul. Right.
I love that, maturing. And to go back to the secret sauce, I feel like that's sort of an issue right now with ESPs, MSPs. They kind of sold you a hostage as a service. They don't want to tell you what they're doing, right? And I've been kind of coining that term, hostage as a service. If I come in and I want to see what you're doing and you don't want to tell me, my guess is you're not giving your business leaders the right information either. So therefore, the visibility of what you have in your environment is lost. And we don't want that when we're trying to manage our data. If we don't know what our data is, how you're managing that, and you're not sharing that, you don't want to work with those types of managed service providers, external service providers. But yeah, and for our organization, and as you said, I have a lot of C's after my name. I really enjoy this, and I've been really working with my team to make sure, hey, as we build your environment, we're building it towards an information security program because we have to control the data.
Steve, you brought up AI, and Rob, I think you just came from a conference where you saw some examples of that. How is AI coming into the CMMC world? What kind of opportunities are you seeing here?
Oh, okay. Start with me. Okay. Well,
Yeah, that's not a me.
yeah. Okay. So, just was at TechNet in Baltimore. Met 5 different companies that are producing software with AI. And just to give you an example, all 5 pretty much do the same thing. There's a little bit of variances between the 2, but mostly you ingest all of the DoD regulations into this software, right? It can function in the GCC high clouds, GCC clouds, AWS, so it's compatible with the FedRAMP authorized clouds. Once you ingest all the regulations in, you put in your system security plan, policies, and procedures, and it just scans through, and within like 40 minutes, it kicks out results to you that tells you which items are failing according to the regulation. And just think about that for a second, because I mentioned earlier about documentation creep. You know, you get eye blurred as you're looking through these documentations. This makes no mistakes. Now, you got to trust but verify, obviously. But the reality is that it gives you an instant feedback of what is wrong so that you can go in and fix it, and gives you confidence going into the assessment that my documentation is pretty good.
So you're saying we still need third-party assessors?
Yes.
And so I will say the same thing.
Yes, because you got to trust but verify. It's same, for organizations that are leveraging a cloud and completely locked it down. So there's no removable media, there's no cell phones, there's no printing. It's completely locked down. While most organizations will think, well, this is an open and shut assessment, you still have to trust but verify. So you still have to go through all 320 objectives and all 110 requirements, even down the physical lane, just to make sure that everything is indeed locked down. So,
do you think there's going to be any kind of cost savings aspect to that? Because the tool is still going to cost money, and you still have to verify. So,
yeah, well, it depends. I mean, if the tool, they're just now starting out, most of these software solutions, but if they can flip those into a governance program or a maintenance program that keeps you on track to make sure that you're doing your annual requirements as you're supposed to, which we're seeing a lot of folks not doing that have already been assessed. They're coming up for reassessment, have not completed their annual risk assessments, tabletop exercises, those kinds of things. So if you got a compliance program that is pushing you to maintain that compliance, they can be very beneficial. But right now, the biggest issue a lot of contractors are having is creating that documentation. This is really 80% of the work for you.
okay, yeah, and the GRC tools, they're supposed to keep you on task.
That
right?
is
You can
true.
assign tasks to individuals.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we see a lot leveraging the GRC tools. A lot of those tools now are coming with templates that you can build your documentation right in there. Some of those tools you can ingest your subs in there, and anytime your subs make a change, it alerts you, so you can go in and take a look at what the subs did to make sure they're still compliant. So there's a lot of different tools, and I'm sure as the CMMC program continues to mature, we're going to see a lot of these mature with it as well.
So, Brian, you brought up maturity. You brought up maturity, Rob. One of the things I want to inquire about is, what are you seeing out there as far as maintaining compliance in between assessments? What are some best practices? What do you recommend? Obviously, a GRC tool is a great thing to have, but DoD can spot check at any time. You have annual attestations. It's not an assessment, and I have 3 years to not worry about anything. So what are some best practices in between?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. We ourselves struggle with it. We like to consider ourselves a quiet leader in the ecosystem, along with some of the other C3PAOs. And we ourselves are running up against, we've had the risk assessment review on our calendar for the last 3 months because we had to keep kicking it right because we get so busy, and that's normal. That's normal business operations. But the more you can lock to that calendar and stick to those annual reviews and break it out over the quarters throughout the year, it makes it a little more palatable. because we are going to look for, it's ironic maturity was stripped out of the program, but that is exactly what we're looking for when we come in to reassess. We want to make sure your documentation has been adjusted and updated over the 3-year period. You should have 3 years worth of tabletop exercises and reviews of your security assessments, risk assessments. All of that should be feeding to the higher organization, which should be tracking all the risks, not just the IT risks. So,
and I would add to that the policies and procedures, making sure that's listed in there, because your 10-day evaluation period is not time to be creating documents, right? I mean, you need to be doing that throughout the year, and there has to be intent to that, and there has to be governance for it. And I know it's an extra task that you have to do, but it's not just because someone's telling you to do it. You really are trying to look for access creep, your asset creep, just making sure you're keeping an idea of your environment. And again, that visibility that you want to make sure you maintain through the entire process.
No, it's a great point, Brian. We're not doing this because CMMC told us to.
Right.
We are doing this because we are network professionals, and that's what we do. We review all of our users to make sure there has not been user creep, right? So
yes,
yeah.
I remember as a young professional, before I got into information security programs, I was the VP of an IT of an organization, and I remember the auditors coming in, and I cringe when I say it now, but I say, I'm really good at doing this. I just haven't documented it. And and I think that's kind of what's really driven me into this and being a liaison for those people. Like, I've been in that seat as I've been building infrastructure, but hey, I can, it's really good to help you through those times and make sure you're doing it properly. And again, that governance is important.
Absolutely. Like I tell a lot of folks, governance does not equal security, but it leads to it. So it's very, very, very important to have it. Not only that, being a prior military man myself, just like you, what happens when you're not there? What happens when Rob goes in the hospital for 3 weeks? Who is going to do what Rob does on a daily basis? Or is the whole organization going to crash? So that's why the documentation is important, not just so much for the security of it, but in case you have to step away, somebody can pick it up.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, we're obviously concerned about malicious actors and protecting, but have you thought that the fact that you review your processes, you actually improve your efficiencies? There's actually organizational improvement from that goes even deeper than that. So absolutely, stay on top of it.
Yeah, and now you're getting into CMMC level 3, where we're establishing key performance indicators and other things like that. So maturity, again, ironic it was stripped out because it's still in the program.
Let's talk about reassessments. Organizations in between their 3-year C3PAO assessments, maybe they grow, maybe they acquire a division. At what point, and I think this is kind of an opinion out there that people are varying on, but what point do you think, Rob, that they need to go through a reassessment because of some change?
That is a great question, and it's another one of those very...
So I'll just jump in on this one, Chris. The challenge, again, the official language that came out of the rulemaking process is a significant change to the information system. And my understanding is that DoD lawyers push back on allowing anyone, depending on, to try to define types of examples of what is significant change. We'll see if we can work with C3POs, DIBCAC, PMO, maybe to put out some guidance in what eventually be a CMMC body of knowledge, because I do think industry needs some guidance on when they should be raising their hand, saying, "Okay, I've made enough significant adjustments to my network, or I've gone through a merger and acquisition process, whatever it is that I need to be reassessed." Adding endpoints in a network is not a significant change. Swapping out your MFA applications probably is, right? And so, what's the laundry list of best practices that industry could rely upon in knowing when they need to be reassessed?
And so, kind of the guidance I give is, if it's outside daily operations, and when I say daily operations, adding users, unlocking users' accounts, maintenance on the switches, the routers, those kinds of things. Just daily, day-to-day business operations. If it's outside of that, more than likely it's going to drive a recertification. A network refresh definitely will probably most likely drive another assessment, especially if you upgrade the firewalls. Many folks are upgrading their firewalls to get the FIPS 140-3 encryption, which is coming out of testing. So that is considered a major change because it's not a daily operational thing. So if you think of it in that aspect of it, you'll tell yourself whether you need the assessment again or not.
I think I would add to that a business impact analysis of all your vendors. Everything that's listed as critical. If critical changes, probably should have some focus on it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. I want to take a moment and see if there are any questions that we had coming in yet. Yes.
Coming from public accounting and working with a lot of the CFOs and leadership, a lot of the DoD supply base are fab shops, small and mid-sized companies. And initially, when the CMMC became a thing, there was talking about not necessarily a giveaway or a hand-me-out, but different opportunities for savings for the investment that they needed to make. Are there any discussions with Treasury or DoD or even with regional bodies to support some of these smaller businesses to make some investments when sometimes it's very challenging for these really small shops?
So again, not speaking for DoD, but just listening to conversations in Washington. I know there is great sentiment within the Department of Defense to try to find as many creative ways to alleviate the cost burden on industry, especially the types of small businesses, some of the fabricators and manufacturers that aren't just IT shops but have real manufacturing floors with CUI that's not necessarily cheap to protect. I think we'll see when the 48 CFR drops if there's more language on cost reimbursement policy on that. So there may be more to see in the second rule. And I know that people like the late Bob Metzger, who was a great, just a contributor, pioneer of CMMC, was working with his contacts on Capitol Hill, trying to get the Congress to, add some type of tax credit or tax break or some type of reinvestment in some bills that I don't think they got across the finish line. We'll have to see. Right now, I think that there's nothing on the table that we can point to that is there, but I know there's a great sentiment to try to continue to move in that direction.
Yeah, and ditto on the C3PAOs. We hear, different things that are being worked by the DoD. We were contacted at Red Spin by a company that is building a cloud environment for the DoD for the purpose of the smaller DIB contractors to be able to leverage at a more scaled price, I guess.
And the challenge with this cost reimbursable, that's great if you have a DoD contract, but if you're a company that aspires to be a DoD contractor, and so you need to get certified to be eligible for the award, and you don't win, you're not getting those costs reimbursed because you don't have a DoD contract.
And I believe we've heard the DoD also state that we know, we know your widget's going to cost more. We just need you to be compliant. So build it into whatever your proposals are. You can recoup it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, the evaluation criteria needs to allow for that, right? The lowest cost, technical acceptable should not be the standard if we want security by design. And I had the opportunity to hear Katie Arrington speak recently, and one of the things that drives her crazy is people putting on LinkedIn that, hey, CMMC is really expensive. She said, if I see that from you contractors, and she made a pretty clear threat, I'm going to send in DIBCAC to come and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Because who else is reading that? China. You're basically putting a target on your back. And she's very clear that just get compliant. That's what we care about.
So I did have a question. Maybe somebody on the panel knows the answer to this, but there are agencies within the DoD that are putting out requisitions where they're building an enclave, right? And then they're bringing in small suppliers, right? Small defense contractors to work in that enclave. They aren't necessarily level 2 compliant, but there's a project that they're putting out there, and they're saying if you work in our enclave with your endpoints that are out of scope, then that's acceptable. So is that or is
No.
there more, right? So
Yeah,
how
no.
does that work?
CUI is CUI, so CMMC is CMMC. No matter what cloud you've got, whether it's on-prem, hybrid, all cloud, it's all the same. You still got to abide by the 320 objectives and the 110 requirements. So, just because somebody stood up a cloud and they're not FedRAMP up.
Somebody's the DoD.
Well, yeah,
right? So-
yeah, right. Well, and again, that organization reached out to us because they were looking for our expertise as C3PAOs to help them build that cloud within the CMMC model so that it could pass an assessment. Going back from the start of CMMC, the CIO office will tell you the DoD is the worst at labeling CUI and putting all the parts in place. So I still have reservations, but if they're following it along and building this, again, it's only going to get better with time. I think it's an absolute game changer for the smaller companies, which have really been the ones that up on the Capitol Hill, they've been touting and fighting for these small businesses to keep those prices down. So hopefully that will come to fruition. They'll have to be assessed just like anybody else will have to be. So that's why I love this program. We ourselves as C3 PAOs have to be assessed. We got to pass the same inspection you do. So, it goes back to my days in the Army. Don't ask your troops to do something you yourself would not do as a leader. And that's why I love this program.
I had a question come in. What's the most common reason an OSC fails an assessment?
They didn't prepare.
There you go.
Yeah, again, we've had 3 clients so far where we've started phase 1 and took a look at the SSP and kind of had to come to Jesus meeting with them that, hey, I'm not sure who you guys worked with or if you did this on your own, but here's the mark and you're way over here. So if we move forward with this assessment, you are definitely going to fail. So you have the option. We can pause right here because we haven't really started, shift you right and give you time. Highly recommend bringing an RPO to assist with that documentation. The key here about CMMC is it's like 70% documentation, about 30% technical skills, right? So the more you get the documentation straight, the better off your assessment's going to be. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore the configurations, because what you have in the documentation is what we're looking at, and then when you show us the evidence, we want to make sure that configuration is matching. But they're missing that. They're missing the objectives. They are not addressing the objectives. They don't understand that the CCAs look at all 320 objectives, and the objectives are what paints the picture for that requirement being met or not met. So you have to address those. We get a lot of copy and paste. So you'll see throughout access control, literally the same thing almost all the way down the document. It's like, did you really address the objectives and the requirements here, or did you just kind of fumble your way through to get through an assessment? So
Brian, we're seeing in the initial data of the level 2 certification assessments that started in mid to late January. And this data is a couple of weeks old, but last time I looked, 88 companies have attained level 2 certification. So they have their certificates, the whole process. The data's in SPRS that goes from CMMC, EMS to SPRS. They have the certs. 88 final certificate. 4 were conditional, so 4 got their certification with a POAM, so they'll have to clear that in 180 days. But there are well over 100 more assessments that have started. And we don't know, just because of the way EMS works, whether or not, as Rob says, they're still in progress, or the C3PO got to the end of phase 1 where you're doing that pre-assessment and said, you're not ready to continue. We don't recommend that you continue. So I don't think there are any actual fails yet in the system where they went through the entire assessment and there are too many not mets. What I don't know is how many of those 100 plus assessments are paused because they weren't ready or they're just in progress. And that gets back to what's being looked at in phase 1. It's the SSP. It's scoping. I mean, I think scoping is probably the most challenging thing for some companies who have not had that conversation with their ESPs, who have not hired an RPO like you to come in and help them prepare, who don't know what type of evidence they're going to have to make ready. So if the C3PO sees all that and it's all jacked up, there's really no logical reason to continue with the assessment, but it's still there as pending in EMAS.
I will tell you, and I know you want to go, Steve. I will tell you, since we broke ground in joint surveillance back in summer of 2022, it has gotten better. A lot of organizations, and I think it's due to webinars like this. It's due to the conferences. It's due to podcasts and all the information that not just C3PAOs and the Cyber AB, but DIB contractors themselves are willing to share with the community to help folks get through this process. So it's getting better, most definitely.
Yeah, that's what I kind of heard a little bit. I mean, you have a system in place, and we're working through it and helping. We don't want you to fail. We want you to succeed, and that's what the program is for. As long as you're following your proper procedures, right? Yeah.
Yeah, all I was wondering on the 88, is that net new? Those aren't conversions from joint
No,
surveillance?
that's separate from the joint surveillance. So now some of the early joint surveillance, as Rob said, and if you got your assessment in August of 2022, it's expiring here soon, and you're probably not getting a cert. So those do not include joint surveillance. And DIBCAC has a joint surveillance data, whether there's 150 or 200 companies got certified under that. This is just level 2 straight up since January.
Yeah, and I was in EMAS last night. I think it's up to like 145 or 100. Yeah.
Right.
I want to add one more comment to that, and then we've got a question in our live audience here. It seems the ecosystem has, and I think these numbers are a statement of that, has the approach of, we really want to help you. C3PAOs want to see you pass. They want to give you an out before you spend a lot of money going through an assessment, because they do the pre-assessment per the CAP, CMMC assessment process, to say, hey, you're not really ready to go down this next phase. And that's helpful in the end, because they need to pause.
I'll amend that just a bit, Chris. DoD wants the companies to pass. There's
Okay.
no doubt about that. I don't want my CPO to care if the company passes or not. He should be an impartial, competent assessor, and using that discretion to make sure you're not wasting their money where you know they're going to fail, and say, okay, we probably shouldn't go forward. But really, the impartiality is a good chance for me to make my public service announcement here, is that this whole program relies on the trust and confidence that every defense contractor is going to get an equal shake, and that there's no easy way, any easy C3PO or assessments on the West Coast or easier assessments on the East Coast. The consistency, the impartiality, competency of the certified third-party assessment organizations, or the CMMC third-party assessment organizations, is paramount to this whole conformance regime having credibility. So I don't want Rob to care if they pass or not. DoD wants them to pass. We'd like them to pass, but he really shouldn't care if they pass or not.
Right. What I do care about is saving you money if you don't need to spend that money. We have a lot of folks that want a gap assessment along with a certification assessment, which we can't do. Right. So then they talk with us about mocks, and I stop them and I'm like, well, didn't you just go through a DIBCAC high assessment like 6 months ago? That should really kind of count as your mock assessment. Why are you going to pay an additional money when you can use that elsewhere? So being money conscious and understanding where they are and what they need should not be driven by pricing and trying to make money off this program. That's where the passion comes from. But what most folks don't understand is, so we get a lot of the primes that say, hey, can you do our headquarters? We push about 30 to 50% of our controls down to our subs. So if you do our subs, can we get a discount off that? Well, no, because we're still doing the same assessment. Just because you have pushed the inherited requirements down to them, we still got to look at those, because it's going to be a different assessment team. We have different teams that operate and function. It could be the same assessment team. We try to keep it that way, but the schedule is, conflicting. So we have due diligence on our part to check every requirement and objective. So even if it's being inherited by a parent prime, we're still going to check it.
I think we had a question over here.
Yeah, what resources like a cyber tackle box would be available for the non-technical users, like an OSC stakeholder who wants to understand the current compliance posture and next steps needed to get CMC qualified? What's been the compliance?
Good question, Brian.
I was going to say a grenade, but
Toolbox. I mean, I think that's what you're trying to build from those that are trying to take care of your network, is being able to provide that visibility through the programs, a GRC tool. I would say all of the documentation we're talking about, staying on top of that. If we can go through those documentations and provide that visibility, and the GRC tool comes in place because you have all the controls listed, and it provides that evidence so they can have a dashboard and see, okay, we're compliant or we're in the red. Just a quick look, and I think that's probably what your business leaders really want. They don't need the nitty gritty and the details.
The dashboard.
They just need the dashboard, and that's exactly the stuff I like building, actually. But I'm going to let someone else kind of go further on that.
Yeah.
Right. It's good. Great answer.
Yeah, so Toolbox, the DoD, actually the CIO's page has a whole bunch of, it has all the documents required. So it's got the assessment guides and all that stuff. So does the Cyber AB site. Those are the great sources to go to for the foundational knowledge that you need for the program. As far as anything built on after that, many of the C3 PAOs like ourselves have resource centers that we've kind of created for the DIB contractors. Go out there and pilfer through there, see if anything is helpful to you. There's white papers, podcast webinars. We ourselves at Redspin do a monthly live webinar. It's called CMMC Connect. There's no agenda. You just show up with your questions and our assessors are on the panel and they'll answer the questions. It's just to help the DIB community mostly get prepared, but they're struggling with certain items. And those items can be very challenging, especially when you're talking globally. So we're now starting to see a lot of the headquarters versions of the US-based presence have been certified. Now they're moving into phase 2 to get the globals done. And now you got language barriers. They don't understand the program. They don't understand what CMMC is driving at. So there's a lot of education in that. So the more you can rely on those kind of resource centers, I think those are probably the best to pull and create your own toolkit from.
That helps, Matt. Appreciate it.
We have Special Forces in the audience, Mr. Miller. Thank you for your service. You have a question.
Yeah, so software, hardware requirements, and how far down the road do those go? I mean, we got stuff being built in China that's building back doors into those things, but are we really checking those? We're saying, hey, you're compliant, but hey, they're still our stuff right out of our own computers or phones or whatever at that point. So how far down that road are we going with this? And what are those requirements for all the software and hardware?
Yeah, so the DoD has the approved product list, the APL. It followed CMMC Day last week, and I went over and moderated some of the panels. I was shocked to find out it takes 6 years for software to get through that vigorous testing program. I think Katie Arrington is working to develop the SWIFT program that will streamline that a little bit. But that is the APL program for software. Oh my gosh, the testing they do. It's almost like the FIPS 140-2 and -3 module encryption testing. It's significant.
So if this software and hardware isn't there yet, how are you assessing the companies when they're not using that type of software?
Yeah,
hardware?
Great question. And by the way, thank you for your service. Yeah, we research it. That when we come across something like that, typically what we do in the report is highlight that yellow for us so the assessor can come back to it. We let the client know this is ungraded and it's unmarked right now because we need to go out and research it. If it's a solution we haven't seen before, we'll dive deep into their webpage. Sometimes we call them. But you're usually seeing the same pretty much tools everywhere you're going. So most of them have been vetted, been looked at, and they're good to go. But for the one-offs, you have to research to find out where was it made, who's managing it, is it holding the CUI data? If it is, where is it storing it? Those are the kinds of questions you got to ask.
Great. I wanted to bring up something that the Cyber EB has recently launched a partnership with, which is the Secure Controls Framework. Can you tell us more about that, Matt, and how it may relate to our ecosystem and assessors in general?
Sure. So this is a separate program that we are the accreditation body for, but it has a very similar mission as CMMC. So think of the Secure Controls Framework. This is a meta framework that's been in existence for a number of years where compliance enthusiasts like these guys spend time crosswalking all the various ISO requirements and HIPAA and NIST standards to a common framework where you can essentially derive certifications from it. So this is for largely non-DoD companies, right? There's a demand across corporate and commercial sectors to be able to prove their cybersecurity conformance, right? It's one thing to just say, well, we follow the NIST CSF framework, and here's my little chart with green circles and amber circles. It's a different thing to actually get certified in NIST CSF. So the SCF Council has come up with essentially distilling from what is by design kind of a squishy framework at the NIST CSF into an accessible and accessible standard. So we are simply the accreditation body, like with CMMC. There'll be 3 PAOs who are charged with conducting SCF certifications on the NIST CSF or other, like the City of New York's got a framework. There's a New Zealand health security standard. So there's going to be a number of what I would call civilian, not protecting CUI, but protecting other aspects of cybersecurity. And it'll function very much like CMMC, where there'll be RPOs, advisors helping companies get prepared for SCF certification. And it's an exciting extension of the same mission, whereas to be able to tell your business partners, your board of directors, or your insurance underwriter that we actually had a third party come in and certify our environment to an established standard. That's a lot different than for some mid-level IT guy to say to the CEO, yeah, we're good, right? Or tell your insurance underwriter, yeah, we're good. And the insurance writer might hire a pen test because they don't believe you. But wouldn't it be better if the underwriter could say, oh, you're certified in SCF CSF 2.0 by a 3 PAO? So we think, we've doubled down on, we believe that certification by accredited third parties is the way that the world's going to work in terms of business. I was talking to your father before about where this is all going. I think you'll see CMMC expand throughout the rest of the civilian executive branch. You saw the FAR CUI rule come out of its dormant stage earlier this year. Ultimately, the way to manage digital risk is to know that your suppliers, your vendors, your partners have had their cybersecurity environment certified. And that's just the way it's no different than getting your taxes or seeing a doctor. You got to have someone else kind of do the assessment.
And that program also focuses on maturity as well.
Yeah.
So the more each year that you do that assessment, you're establishing yourself and building upon, the groundwork you've already laid in year one, and then you should be going up from there. So.
And I'll just add that the Secure Controls Council, the SCF who built all of this, we're just the accreditation body, works with NIST. NIST recognizes the work that they've done on a lot of this. So SCF Council is the website. There's a lot of good information there.
Great. Is this something that could be applicable to critical infrastructure as well?
Certainly. I think it's going to be an attractive certification option for other sectors, whether it's the water sector, transportation sector. You can really, because it's a master meta matrix, you can really customize what security controls you want. You could build your own certification program based on the framework.
So what I'm hearing is people who are in this ecosystem, like some of the MSPs that are already doing a lot of work related to CMMC, this might be a natural progression to offer that under their offerings as well.
I think so. I mean, we believe in third-party certification, which is why we got involved. We've got 5 initial 3 PAOs going through the pilot program, and we've got companies lined up, some big ones that want to go ahead and be one of the first ones to go through the pilot certification program. So we're just getting started.
Awesome. Great.
I had a question come in, if you don't mind. In 2022, OSC's SPUR scores were off up to 100 points. Is there any data for SPUR scores in 2025, and how far off are the OCS scores?
I don't have access to SPRS, but so I can't answer that question.
Yeah, well, and I don't know what the other C3 PAOs are doing. I can only tell you what we at Redspin are doing. The assessments we've completed so far to date, which is right around 15-ish, somewhere in there, is they've all completed with 110s. So again, it's getting better. The program's getting better. But the folks we were seeing early on, just like with joint surveillance, are the folks that really prepared. They knew it was coming. They knew they wanted to get in early, so they prepared. We're waiting on that onslaught of the folks that were the naysayers throughout the entire program that said CMMC was going away. Eventually, they're going to come across our vision here, and it's not going to be pretty, which is why I think they extended the appeals process, which, knock on wood, we haven't had an appeals yet, simply because all the C3 PAs, when they find a gap, they kind of pause the assessment, if you will, and have a full conversation, because that's usually when compensating controls spill out and you can identify whether it's met or not met. But yeah, it's just I don't know about the SPRS score, because the joint surveillance was different. Everything was allowed in the POAM then. Unlike CMMC, the 3 and 5 point items can't go in. So that's going to throw off our data points that we collected from joint surveillance. But right now, the trend is looking the same.
I do have a question, probably for you guys. What are the risks of waiting to get certified at this point? I know Title 48's not out, although there are primes out there, and the DoD is sprinkling in not just certification requirements, right? So it is showing up.
Yeah, so see, there's a few risks, right? There's a risk in terms of being conforming to DoD requirements. So I was on stage with a rep from the PMO at CS2 last week, who pointed out that even though the 32 CFR talks about the 4 phases and first will be level 2 self, they reserve the right, and it's in the rule, the DoD can inject level 2 C-3PO requirements in any contract that they want if they justify it, essentially. So it's not as if there's not going to be a potential requirement for either a contract you have or aspire to bid on where you're going to have actually have a C-3PO certification. The other risk is that we've got 70 C-3PAOs. The real limiting factor is not the C-3PAOs, but the number of CCAs, right? So that is when you think about a bottleneck or the most critical element of scaling the ecosystem to full capacity, it's the CCAs. And so I know DoD put a lot. One of the reasons we know you're getting a competent assessor is just the requirements that the DoD put on. You have to have the years of experience. You have to have an 8140 certification, like a CISSP or a CISA from one of the other certification bodies. You have to have a Tier 3 security determination. You have to have taken the CCP course, pass the CCP test. You have to take a CCA authorized course. You have to pass the CCA high stakes exam, 4-hour exam. That's a lot. Right, so we need more CCAs. I'll take this opportunity, Chris, to plug for those in Indiana, elsewhere watching. It's a great way to get involved in cybersecurity. Right,
Absolutely.
You don't have to have a degree in computer science. It's going to be and you can speak this better than I, Rob, a flexible and very rewarding profession, and not only being able to travel in a lot of interesting companies. But you could do full time or part time. It's a very flexible, I would think, line of work.
Absolutely.
And we need more CCAs.
Yeah, more CCAs. I will tell you, as we were building out the Red Spin teams, our leadership at Clearwater was like, "How much are these guys costing us?" Because it's supply and demand right now.
Which goes to Steve, to answer your question. The other risk is that when you're finally ready to step up and get certified, that you may be waiting in a long line. So Rob can speak better to that. I know other C-3POs will have a dance card that's filled for the rest of this year. And this is just on voluntary assessments.
Yeah.
These are, as Rob said, the companies that have kind of talking the talk and walking the walk, getting in line. Once you start seeing requirements come in from the 48, those lines will get longer.
Yeah, there's a myth out there that us C-3PAOs don't get along, but that's just a myth. We have to get along because we got to pass clients back and forth, especially if we've consulted with one, we can't certify them. So we got to pass them off to another C-3PAO. Talking with those folks, many of them are already booked through this year. So that is one of the biggest risks.
Yeah.
If you have a target date of September, October of this year to be certified, you better contact a C-3PAO now because many of them are already filled up in those months. We've even got folks already scheduling certifications in 2026. So that's one of the biggest risks. The second is we're hearing a lot as we're speaking with contractors that as they're bidding on contracts, the first question they get is, are you CMMC certified? From the contracting agency. Cool. Then the second thing is, if you're not certified, are you already engaged with a C-3PAO? If not, when are you getting engaged with a C-3PAO? So many C-3PAOs have come up with attestation letters that the contractors can pass off to the contracting agency to say, yes, we're involved with a C-3PAO. This is our certification assessment dates, et cetera, et cetera. So there's numerous risks, but there's so much more that you gain by jumping in and doing this. I haven't validated any of the data points, but I'm understanding out of the DIB companies in Texas, a lot of them have doubled in their contracts just since they got joint surveillance certified. So, if you've got that certificate in hand, it's pretty much an open door to the contracts you probably didn't have access to, last year or the year before. So
We've told clients this is the great shakeup right now. If you get in there first, advertise that, or if you get certified early, advertise, I'm certified, because the primes really care about that right now.
absolutely. The other thing is, for us C3PAOs, if you lock in a prime, you're getting their subs as well. By the time you finish the prime headquarters and each of their subs, you've already run through the 3 years, and you're now circling back and starting all over again with that prime and their subs. So that means you've got teams that may not ever see anything outside of a Boeing or a Northrop Grumman, because they'll be certifying them year after year after year.
Awesome. Bob, I want to make sure we have some time for questions from online. Do you have some yet? Okay.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Matt, first of all, I really appreciate what you do with the Grant body, keeping the standard. I think the people in this room are holding the standard, which is really exciting to see. On that, and being aware of the daily use of assessments that we anticipate coming in, back to you, Matt. What are we doing to hold the standard? I think companies like Meerkat have a standard. We had a conversation, Chris and I, about what happens. I just recently finished my master's degree that had to rate my professor, and this concern of, what if this assessment said, well, we'll let you in? You mentioned the MFA. No, it keep coming in 5 days later. Oh, I just implemented MFA. Can you let me say I have it now? That, for an example. What do we do to hold the line? Yeah.
It gets to the question of why we actually exist as the accreditation body. That we do a lot of things. We run town halls, we run the marketplace, speak at webinars, which we're happy to do. But ultimately, we exist to ensure the competency and impartiality of the C3POs and their personnel. And so whether it is holding them to the ISO 1720 standard, to the CMMC assessment process, which is the procedural requirements they have to follow in conducting level 2 certification assessment, the code of professional conduct, we published that as well. That's the ethical framework. And Rob mentioned that if you are a C3PO, you're certainly welcome to do some consulting or advisory work. You just can't certify those companies that you advised. And if you want to do a mock assessment, that's great. But that mock assessment, whether it's full or partial, better be just like a real assessment. You're going in there and you're doing a met, not met, and you're handing them a piece of paper, and then you're walking out the door. And we are essentially the policing agent to ensure that. And so as we're building our staff, and as CMMC is now coming to life, we'll be patrolling the streets with regularity. They're going to have to come through us like a pit stop here at Indy every year, essentially, for a checkup, whether it's an authorization renewal or eventually when the accreditation program's up. And we're going to be interviewing them. We're going to be looking in their paperwork, just like the defense contractor does when Rob's team assesses them. We're going to have our audit team do the same thing with them. So, and if we're not doing our job, then the program is going to suffer. So it's a very important role that we have. We're privileged to serve as the department's exclusive accreditation body. And prior to CMMC, starting, we've collaborated with the C3POs closely, working with joint surveillance. We have meetings every week. Ultimately, the relationship will probably cool down a bit because I have to now put on my enforcement hat on, and that's just the way it's got to be.
The Indy 500 metaphor and the standard of excellence.
We as the C3PAOs also police that up. There's a lot of CCPs and CCAs that are not affiliated to C3PAOs and RPOs. You'll run into them throughout engagements. You'll see them that they've been hired by that company to prepare them. And when you go through and assess them, you can see kind of if their work was good or not. If it wasn't, we're typically reporting that over to the Cyber AB. So the C3PAOs are also doing that policing, but they're the cops we report to.
But ultimately, if they're cutting corners, they'll find themselves on the front page of the paper.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can we speak a little bit about what all of you have seen for emerging cyber threats? Obviously, cybersecurity is a career path that will probably never stop changing. There will always be something new to study. I know I heard of one recently that was kind of mind-blowing, but a casino had a breach through their aquarium heater, Internet of Things heater. But can you speak to some of the things you've seen out there and help educate the DIB?
I saw a lot, when I spent some time at CISA within DHS, and I would certainly get all the briefings on a daily basis. I saw a lot more back then. I don't see it as much now, but I was 2 weeks ago out in San Francisco for the annual RSA conference, which is probably the largest cybersecurity conference. And the entire theme of all the conversations, both official and, the off-Broadway conversations, were all about how cyber threat actors continue to innovate, and yet they are still going to the tried and true same tactics that haven't changed, because our defenses still aren't where they should be. They are still walking through the front door with spear phishing and basically targeting that least, the weakest link in a company, where you get one employee to hit one keystroke on an email that they got, and your network is owned. And until we fix that, there's no real incentive for the cyber threat actors who are going after commercial targets to do anything else. Now, when they're trying to hit major banks and governments, there's a higher level of effort. But for defense contractors, the best thing you can do, in addition to implementing 800-171, is to ensure that your people are aware of the threat.
Absolutely. I think you were in my head. Awareness and training. Build that culture. Safety first, security always, right? I've been on sites with clients where I purposefully took off my visitor badge just to see if anybody would stop me as we're walking through the physical on-site. Minute I took it off, somebody was in my face like, "Excuse me, do you have a badge?" So you've got to ingrain that in the folks. The ransomware is on the rise right now for attacks. How are they getting the ransomware attacks in? Phishing. Somebody clicks on something, and next thing you know, you're being held hostage. So awareness and training, go above and beyond. I've seen hospitals across the country that do these. They'll set up outside the cafeterias and do, a cyber challenge. As folks come by, they can take a little quiz and win some kind of prize. Anything you can do to get the users used to being aware of that. I mean, shoot, we all struggle with that with our families, right? I think if my mother-in-law clicks on one more link, I'm going to have a heart attack. But she's getting better. She comes out and says, "Oh, IT guy, is this legit?" That's all security awareness and training.
Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize enough. Out at RSA, there was a lot of new innovative tools on the defensive side, advanced technologies, all sorts of new software to protect, to screen trap. But it's a people. It's the human factor. And it used to be the worst thing an employee could do was to spill coffee on their laptop or do something stupid at an office holiday party. Now the worst thing you can do is like one keystroke, and I don't think that's stressed enough within companies still to this day.
Yeah, our CEO, with our parent company Clearwater Security, they do a monthly risk review. So it's a cyber report that our CEO comes in, he gets all the latest stuff, and then he comes out and talks on this webinar about the latest risks. The more you do that, the more you sign up for CIS alerts and all the other different things, the more you get awareness of what the threats are, the better you can protect yourself against it.
One of the things that, and it doesn't get talked about, is insider threats. Mm-hmm. And we have snapped into our fast track solution an insider threat detection mechanism. So we do have that wrapped around, but I think it's something that just gets bypassed.
Absolutely, because everybody thinks all the folks that work for our company are great people. Nobody wants to think they're bad, right? But what happens when I say, "Hey, Matt, it's been great having you as the CEO, but you got to go." Right. Well, Matt's going to download everything he can before he goes.
Well, it's just changing activity, right. Changing behavior.
Yeah, right. So the user is still the greatest threat we have.
Awesome.
Had another question come in. When will revision 3 show up?
NIST 800-171 revision 3. Right. So a couple of years ago, NIST went ahead and released that, and DoD stated unequivocally that we'll get to that. So for everyone, make sure no one's confused. The CMMC standard is still revision 2 for 800-171. However, DoD in public has mentioned that they are working now on Rev 3, and in fact, the organizational defined parameters, or ODPs, which will be a feature of Rev 3, which are those specified settings for certain security requirements. DoD took a stab. It was quite an effort, actually. James Galuli, the PMO, was the right point. And they brought in a lot of expertise in these DoD working groups. I still think we're well, to the question, Brian, it's still over the horizon, right? And it will probably require another round of rulemaking to implement Rev 3. There'll have to be a grandfather phase, so it's not just they're going to hit the lights and everyone's got to be at Rev 3. C-3PO is going to get trained on how, in some cases, might have to be able to, what's the delta from Rev 2? We'll have to change the doctrine on some stuff. So it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen this year. I'd be surprised if it happened the next year, but it's coming.
Yeah, and if you look at the changes between Revision 2 and Revision 3, Revision 3 is bringing 101 or 102 more objectives on top of the 110, right? So it's definitely a little bit more challenging. What I recommend to the folks is if you've certified under CMMC here this year, start prepping for Rev 3. It's only going to improve the posture security of your organization. But more importantly, if Katie does move and the DoD pushes this through, within a year or two, you could see Rev 3 right around the time you're going for a recertification. So it's best to be prepared.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about those ODPs. Recently released. A lot of people kind of flew under the radar, but would it be wise to start following some of those ODPs because the DoD has clearly said this is an industry best practice?
Yeah. So the ODPs, when they came out, it had a lot of buzz with our teams. I was getting blown up on messages from the team about the ODPs coming out. Haven't really reviewed them yet, but we are in the process of taking those ODPs and reviewing them to Rev 2, see how they apply. Mainly they're going to be for Rev 3, but it's also going to be, I believe, at CMMC level 3 maybe for some of those. So we're still trying to decipher how that's going to ingest. But we've already seen the spillover into a lot of organizations. National Institutes of Health have already started 800-171 assessments. So we now need to go back through those ODPs and see if any of those would apply towards that. And then the ODPs towards, the other federal agencies that are coming on board, energy, Department of Education, et cetera, et cetera. So many of them are going to adopt the different ODPs. So we'll see how it plays out. But right now, we're still deciphering it.
Excellent. And then we haven't talked yet, or we just briefly did, about the FAR CUI rule, and that's kind of percolating in the background, working on getting finalized. What is that going to mean for our industry?
Well, I don't know global impact. I'll leave that to the Cyber AB. But one of the biggest changes we've noticed in the FAR is that your reporting requirements for an incident has shifted from 72 hours to 8. That's pretty
short.
significant. That's going to be a heavy lift for many organizations. And we talked about, what is the benefits of having an ESP? There's one of them, right? Because they are watching for those alerts. Soon as it happens, you can meet that 8-hour requirement. It will be interesting to see how this unfolds over the next year or two. I don't know about you, but I've never been able to gather all the information I need within 8 hours. It's hard to do it within 72. So I'm not really sure what the DoD is expecting. Maybe it's just more of an admission that, yes, we've seen it. Yes, we're working on it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But that was the most significant change we saw in the FAR rule.
Do you have anything to say to that?
No, as I said earlier, I think that FAR CUI rule had been dormant for longer than before CMMC started.
8 years.
So the fact that it's now come back to the surface, I think, if you're reading tea leaves again, I think, having NIST 800-171, whatever Rev, as a unifying standard, which has always been a goal from a national cybersecurity policy, and having third parties certified is the way the world's going to work.
There was also another significant part of that proposed rule that said, here's how we're going to identify CUI. Can you speak to the importance of that and whether or not that's a good practice to be done by our primes in the DIB?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about some of the things everybody struggles with, identifying what type of data they have is one of the biggest issues. Goes back to scoping. You can't really scope a project if you don't know what data you have and where it's at. So anything that these regulations can do to help clarify that is only going to make the program better. And right now there is still a lot of confusion between basic and specified CUI and what the difference is.
Right. The standard form is now in play where there's going to be some type of standard form where there's documents. So I think it's still not enough clarity how that's all going to work, but it's clearly someone's thinking of it.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about CUI. Because of the lack of clarity, we hear sometimes that a prime may or may not have marked CUI correctly. Can you give some guidance to the DIB on what to do in those scenarios?
Yeah, so one of the things we look for as the CCAs when we come on board is have you trained your folks to recognize CUI? I mean, that's part of the DoD CUI handling training that is required for your users, as well as the insider threat training. So we really kind of look at that and say, hey, where is the data sitting? What type is it? Anything that can help clarify that for them is obviously going to make things better for them. But it's very challenging. Again, there's a lot that still has to come to fruition. I think as the program continues to grow and we get rid of some of these little bumps, mainly getting the DoD on board, but really what we look for, have you trained your folks to recognize that data when it comes in? And then what is the process when it does come in? Who do they contact? The first words out of their mouth should be the CISO or the CIO or somebody on the security team that can come in and clean things up. You can't control things that are out of your control, but you can prepare for them in case it does happen. And that's really what we look for.
It's a fair conversation point. I do think the government has a lot of work to do on its side to make sure that contracting officers understand how CUI should be marked, what's on the DoD CUI registry and all that. But I also have some concern that it's a bit of a distraction to the defense industry. The first priority should be make sure you're conforming to NIST 800-171. Because if you fail that, you can't say, well, yeah, but the DoD doesn't mark the CUI properly, right? It's like, true, but you still didn't get certified. So the first priority is DoD is working on the training and the marking of CUI. Focus on implementing 800-171, and hopefully we'll all get to a happier place on both sides of that.
We've observed at Meerkat that some of the primes are telling subs, go get certified now. And some of the subs are saying, but I don't even handle CUI. Is there some guidance you can give to those subs?
Yeah, so it goes back to the contract. What is in the contract? If the contract states, or currently right now, the 48 rule will clean those up a little bit and strip out the DFARS clauses and put in the actual CMMC levels. But if you have the DFARS 7012 clause in the contract, that means at some point that particular contract has been identified to either generate, receive, or do something with some kind of CUI. Whether you have it now in your journey portion of this contract has no bearing. That contract was built so CUI could be used. Thus, you have to prepare yourself for that level.
Great.
Another question came in. How long is a Tier 3 background approval taking now?
It's been 85 years.
Too long. And, I think that the PMO is certainly sensitive to this. They're not the ones conducting the background investigation. And they're also not the ones who I think were behind making this a requirement for as many, people in the ecosystem as it is. It's taken months. So the policy is if you haven't heard anything in 6 months, let DoD know, and then they'll see where it stands. So I would say at a minimum, if you've never had a clearance and you're putting in for your Tier 3, especially if you've had extensive foreign travel or you've got family members living abroad, that's probably going to take a bit longer. And I know DoD recognizes that this is still an issue, and there's just no great answer right now.
And kind of in that same lane, any notable DOGE impacts to CMMC?
I don't think so. Ms. Arrington's talked about this before. She had some insight into the DOGE team. I've always maintained this is a DOGE good news story because there are no taxpayer dollars coming into the program other than I mean, I think most of the PMO folks were detailees to begin with anyway. We don't receive any federal funding. There's certainly a cost impact to industry, and that's always a sensitive issue for certainly members of Congress. But in terms of this being a big government jobs program, it's not. I think this should be heralded as an example of how government can impose norms on industry. You know, no one's forcing anyone to work with DoD, right? This is a lot of regulatory regimes are you must do this and you must do that, whether you like it or not, because you're in the fishing industry or you're running cranberry bogs in Maine and you've got to run that a certain way. This is if you want to work with the Department of Defense, you have to meet this standard.
Yes.
And that's all that DoD is really saying. So I think that DOJ would look at this thinking that's actually a pretty good program. It doesn't take taxpayers' money. It has a public good in terms of the national interest. National security, national interest. So I don't see any issues. I do know that in terms of the formal, just being in D.C., the DOJ had requirements for each department saying justify your rules and justify your programs. I know that the PMO responded very confidently with their RFI to leadership that eventually all rolls up to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and he will have to make a decision on what DOJ impacts. But if you just listen to what Mr. McEwen said at CMMC Day, what Mr. Boccia said at RSA, which Katie Arrington continues to say, Stacey Boccianic continues to say, CMMC is not going anywhere. There's statutory roots in this requirement. If you look back, going back and speaking again, Bob Metzger with that seminal study, Deliver Uncompromised, that's what then motivated Congress to put into the National Defense Authorization Act that DoD needs to do something about securing the supply chain. And DoD's answer is CMMC. So I don't know how we get away from that, regardless of what someone at DOJ might think about the program.
Yeah, and I think the DOD, just my personal opinion, 31 years working with them, I think they did this right. If you go back to the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, that's when Katie Arrington started having meetings with industry. Folks like us that we have no contracts, Clearwater Security and Redspin, we're not contractors. We don't have contracts. But how do you get into that space? How do you become part of that? They reached out to us to say, hey, what do you guys do in industry? I mean, one of the first things we did early on when we became authorized was walk the DOD off the ledge of requiring 5 to 6 assessors per assessment. Industry, we don't do that. We try to scale down as much as we can. And while you're not going to be a subject matter expert in everything, you can be pretty dangerous in all of them. So that mentality, plus the way the program kind of unfolded, they really did a great job keeping industry molded in there, getting all the feedback, listening to that feedback and ingesting it. I think, from everybody that played a role in getting the program off the ground, I think they did an awesome job, especially when they flipped it over from acquisitions to the CIO office and we started seeing timelines now being met. They would put targets on the calendar and they were very close to it. That let me know that this was up and running perfectly. So got some things to improve, but we're getting there.
Thank you to this panel. Thank you to Lifeline. But this is the kind of stuff that I think helps the entire industry, these conversations. So I appreciate your transparency. Thank you for your time, for being here, gentlemen. And thank you to the audience. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.